Yeah, you can do mine. Show me how to do it real quick.
Good afternoon. I would like to call this school board briefing to order. The time is 2 o'clock on September the 9th. I would like to acknowledge that Mr. Scott is not with us due to illness. Is he going to be by phone, do you know? Okay. All right. We will begin with, we have nothing under executive services. Under Mr. Martin, it says nothing, but do you have a presentation for us? You're going to do that under business and finance with them? Okay. All right, so we'll move on to business and finance with Dr. Desamore, Mr. Tubb, Mr. Santiago, and Dr. Graham. Call on you.
I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tubb and Mr. Santiago. There are several things in business and finance. That's really the entire meeting today. And they're going to talk about our annual financial report, and then talk about our facilities plan, and then public-private partnerships. One leads to the next, is my understanding. Okay.
Very good.
Thanks.
It's up to you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ms. Dozier, board members, Dr. Graham. I'm Bill Tubb, your Executive Director for Financial Services, and I have Mr. Mark Santiago with me. He's the Director of Financial Accounting and Property Records. We're here to update you on the School District of Lee County's annual financial report. This report's been prepared by Mr. Santiago with the assistance of Ms. Lucy Best, Ms. Sarah Cox, Ms. Jeanette Ingersoll, and Ms. Lori Tant. I had nothing to do with it. They did it all. They do the hard work. I just come up here and talk to you.
Okay.
Bill?
Mr. Tubb, they can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
If you'll make sure the mic is directed correctly, right the way you're speaking.
Okay.
There you go.
The Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB, requires that the governmental units, such as school districts, to implement a financial reporting model containing management discussions and analysis, MDA, the basic financial statements, and notes to the basic financial statements, along with certain supplementary information. This format is based on the account structure found in the Financial Program Cost Accounting and Reporting for Florida School Districts publication known as the Red Book. As we move into the financial highlights slides that we've prepared, it's important for the board to note that the financial highlights and the figures being presented today refer to the governmental-wide accrual accounting structure. This means that the figures included in the general, federal, capital, debt service, and internal service funds. It also includes expenses that are not typically seen in monthly reporting, such as depreciation and other liabilities, such as compensated absences and other post-employment benefits, like long-term employee health coverage.
The district's total assets exceeded our liabilities by $1,089,961,140. Our net position decreased over the prior year by $28,998,275, meaning that we spent more than we received in revenue. This figure also includes approximately $51 million in depreciation expense. Total district expenses for governmental activities were $875,039,922. The district received approximately $52.6 million from program-specific revenues to offset these expenses. The rest was expense from general revenue dollars. The district's combined ending fund balance was $233,291,606, which was approximately $42 million less than last year's ending fund balance. This decrease can mainly be attributed to the spend down of capital funds through our COPS, Q-SQUIB, and capital outlay portion of property taxes, commonly known as 2-mil money. The general fund total fund balance at fiscal year end 2014 was $127,723,893, which is a 2.3% increase over the general fund balance at the end of the 2013 fiscal year. This increase was mainly attributed to the increase in property tax revenue in fiscal year 14 of $15,811,726. The district's ending fund balance broken into non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and unassigned balances. Non-spendable balances are made up of our parts inventories. The restricted balances are dollars that are restricted by external agencies or by statutory requirements. Assigned fund balances are dollars that were encumbered on purchase orders or assigned to specific district purposes requiring board approval. Unassigned funds are those dollars that were not currently assigned or restricted. Approximately $46 million of the unassigned fund balance is currently in the district's reserves. This illustration that you can see before you depicts the district's revenue sources in FY14. As you can see, the majority of the district's funding is from property taxes and state funding sources. And the state funding sources include the FEFP and our grant revenue. The property tax was approximately 52% of our revenue, which was $436,087,889. The state funding revenue amounts were $348,405,540. Our next illustration shows at a high level the breakout of overall district expenses for all funds, with 50% being attributable to instructional expenses, 40% to instructional support, and 10% to administrative. It is important to note that approximately 90% of our expenditures go directly or indirectly into the support of our classrooms.
Did you say 90%?
Our next illustration shows a more detailed breakout of the 40% of instructional support expenses that was on our previous slide. The largest of these expense areas consisted of facility maintenance and non-capitalized equipment purchases, representing about 31%, the operation of plant, which was about 19%, and student transportation costs of 15%. Our next illustration shows a more detailed breakout of the 10% of district expenses spent on administration. The largest category of these expenses, approximately 50% of them, was attributable to administration housed in our schools. I'll now turn it back over to Mr. Tubb. Our next three slides will go over factors that have a district on the bearing on the district's future.
The state of Florida funds the district through the Florida Education Finance Program, FEFP. The 2015 FEFP allocation contained a 1.8% increase per student funding. We believe this increase in education funding from the state signals optimism about the future economic conditions, but it should be noted that our funding levels per student still have not returned to the levels of 2007. And a large portion of this increase reflects a transfer into the FEFP program, the funds given by the state outside the FEFP program last year for teachers' raises. It means it was outside the FEFP, they stuck it in there, and then they said, okay, we've had an increase. Property tax rolls for Lee County increased by 8.4% over fiscal year 13-14. No reserves were used in the fiscal year 13-14, so they have maintained. Even with the increase in property tax rolls, the $1.5 million limitation on capital funding continues to place the district in a very precarious position towards our maintenance, technology, and new seats required for anticipated growth. And finally, contract negotiations continue with our bargaining units, TALC and SPALC, and a system of performance pay, which is required by the state. And that concludes our presentation. do you have any questions at this time?
Board members, do you have any questions or comments for Mr. Tubb or Mr. Santiago?
Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation and the explanation. And I just have one question. I noted in one of the graphs that the investment earnings that we have are 0%. Could you explain that a little bit?
You want to go?
Yeah. It's represented as 0% because the amount that we had taken in so far in FY14 for investments didn't equal at least 1% of the total, even though we did have positive revenue. The investment advisors that we have brought on board for the district, they began their work in the very last quarter of fiscal year 14, so we anticipate next year's report to show quite a substantial growth in our investments.
Okay. Do you have like a ballpark dollar amount of what the investment earnings might have been?
Do we know about how much? No.
We will get that for you.
Thank you.
I know you might note that prior to the new investment advisors coming on board, we had all of our investments with SBA, and we were earning 16 basis points, which is not much.
Right.
Right.
And they will be here in 2 weeks, our investment advisors, to present with you our first quarter earnings.
Thank you.
They'll be the next 2
Now,
weeks.
how long
briefing.
have we had those investment advisors now? When did we make that policy? How long ago was it?
It was in April.
So it hasn't even been a year yet, so
No.
it'll be
It's barely
interest-
been 1 quarter.
it'll be interesting to see what they have to present to us.
I think you will be pleased.
Board members, does anybody else have any questions or comments?
I just have one more. So then, before the new investment people came on board, there was no carryover? I mean, we weren't making any money on investments, is that?
16 basis points, which is 0.16%.
Thank you.
Ms. Dozier?
Yes, ma'am.
Before you go to the next group, Spout did settle last night. I thought maybe Dr. Adkins could give an update on that since that impacts some of this. He's right here.
Oh, okay. Come on up, Dr. Atkins.
Members, it's my pleasure to come before you today and announce that we did reach a tentative agreement last night with our Support Personnel Association of Lee County. The highlights of it will be coming out, but just suffice it to say that we did have a 4.1% salary increase, which is the 3% that you all had set aside, plus that those additional dollars that we had saved from the insurance fund. So that added together, we were able to put together 4.1%. And we also had a lot of other good agreements, I think, and we'll be bringing that forward, hopefully to ratification at a board meeting in the near future.
Very good. Board members, do you have any questions? Mr. Armstrong?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Atkins, for all the hard work you've done and put into that, and to Talc and Spout. I appreciate everything you guys are doing as well. Thank you.
Any other comments, board members? Any other questions before our team leaves? Thank you very much. Good presentation. We appreciate all the information. And I certainly, for one, and I know I speak for everyone, looking forward to hearing that financial report at an October meeting. So thank you. Okay, we will now segue into the next group, which is, let's see, Dr. Amy Desamore, and I think she has a large group of people with her. She has Mr. Mark Mora, she has Mr. Jerry Ford, and she has Mr. Reginald Snell, and she's giving you a rub on the head. You just didn't see it. Did you feel it? Did you feel the good aura out there? Okay, all right. I don't know. Are you going to begin, Dr. Desamore?
I am. I'm going to begin because
Welcome.
Thank you. Dr. Graham, members of the board, we are here to talk about a couple different issues with you. First, before we got into the larger issue of the public-private partnership, I just want to make sure we did have the item of the 5-10-20 work plan on the agenda as well. So I just wanted to bring to your attention that you all do have a draft of that 5-10-20 work plan in your briefing materials. It is the standard report that we do give to the state every year that talks about our capital plan and capacity needs over 5 years, over 10 years, and over 20 years. This changes every year. And so there will be changes, of course, that will be coming forward in the subsequent years to come. But as far as the plan that you have here, it lays out all of the items that we have previously talked about. We have denoted some unfunded need, of course, within this plan because we talked about the need that we have for schools within the next 5 years that at the time we currently do not have revenue for. So you will see that reflected within the 5-10-20 plan that you have in your backup materials. And so this plan is due to the state by October 1st. We will have a public hearing on this at our next board meeting on September 23rd. So we just want to be sure to be able to bring the draft to you and find out if you had any questions related to that. So very much on the vein of this need for buildings over the next 5 to 10 years and how those buildings will be funded, we're here to talk about the issue of public-private partnerships. A couple of board meetings ago, we had a short conversation about it, and then, of course, you all all requested for us to come back and have a longer briefing related to it with some additional information, and so that's what we've done today. I'm going to first turn it over to Mr. Martin, who I believe wants to talk to us about some of the legalities around this, and then turn it over to these gentlemen here that I'm sitting with to talk about some additional details as far as capacity and funding.
Thank you, Dr. Desmores. To begin the discussion, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the requirements of Florida statute with respect to public-private partnerships. The law allows the establishment of a public-private partnership for the purpose of building a qualifying project. And qualifying project is defined by the statute. Next slide, please. Won't move. There it is. A qualifying project is allowed to be established by the statute by a responsible public entity. A responsible public entity can use a public-private partnership to build a qualifying project, which the statute defines as including a building or facility that will be used by a public educational institution. And a responsible public entity includes a school board, so it's clear that the public-private partnership can be used by a school board to build facilities, to build schools. In the form of proposals, there are different components that can be included in the proposal submitted for a public-private partnership, which include the design of the facility, the building of the facility, the finance of the cost of the facility, obtaining the property upon which the facility would be built, the payment structure for the cost of the building of the facility, the maintenance of the facility, and it can also propose expansion of an existing facility. So the proposal submitted for the private-public partnership can conclude one or all of these components. The procurement procedures allow for the governmental entity to receive unsolicited proposals. If you receive unsolicited proposals for a private-public partnership and you wish to consider entering into an agreement with a proposer, the statute requires that a notice be published in the Florida Administrative Register and in a newspaper of general circulation in the school district. The notice has to be provided once per week for 2 weeks, has to describe the scope of the proposal, the service to be provided under the proposal, and indicate willingness to accept proposals for the same service. The statute authorizes the school board to set the time frame within which proposals will be received within the span of as little as 21 or as many as 120 days. You can also solicit proposals for a public-private partnership. Can issue an RFP for that purpose. The RFP, of course, would define the scope of services that you're seeking through that partnership, and standard procurement procedures would be followed if you choose to solicit those proposals yourself through an RFP. The statute requires that the public entity perform an analysis in response to proposals submitted if it wishes to consider entering into an agreement. It requires an independent analysis demonstrating cost effectiveness and public benefit. The analysis must show that there's a public need for the facility that would be built through that public-private partnership, that based upon the proposal it would be acquired at a reasonable cost, and the completion of the project would be timely in terms of meeting the need that's in place for that particular facility. The statute requires the school board to charge the proposer a fee for the cost of processing, reviewing, and evaluating their request, and that fee can be used for the cost of private consultants, an attorney, or financial advisors that have expertise in this area. Finally, the proposed project must be owned by the school board upon completion of the agreement, so it must be a lease purchase form of agreement. It must result in ownership by the school board. Finally, the selection criteria. The statute requires that the proposer meet whatever standards the school board has in place for professional services. So again, if it's for the purpose of constructing a building, a facility, then the standards that the school board already has in place for qualifications for a contractor would have to be met. Statute establishes additional criteria for the purpose of making a selection decision, which can include the professional qualifications of business terms presented in the proposal, innovative design, cost reduction terms in the proposal, and the finance plans established in the proposal. That's a brief overview of the statute. I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Board members, does anyone have any questions of Mr. Martin? All right. I did hear you say that it has to be a lease purchase. In other words, if somebody from the community offers us a piece of land for a certain amount of time for our use, that would not be considered part of this P3 or lease purchase, correct?
Well, the public-private partnership has to result in ownership, but that would be for the purpose of the facility. And if a donor wanted to donate land to the school district,
Oh no, they want the land. They want the land to remain in the family.
yes, ma'am, only for a period of time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that would not meet the criteria.
Not
here, is
for
what
this
you're saying.
particular form of project. There may be other options to use that land, which I would have to research.
Okay. All right.
I'm not sure
Well,
about the viability.
We had someone make a proposal to that. In fact, they made it to me yesterday, and I gave it immediately to Dr. Desimore, and Mr. Snell were going to talk about it. So that may be something we need to look into so we can get
Okay.
them the correct answers.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Fisher?
Yes. Mr. Martin, in this situation, public-private partnership, does the building have to be put on land that the school district currently owns? If
Well,
it's
it does
donated?
not. That can be part of the purchase.
Part of the purchase.
That can be part of the proposal, would potentially can be for the proposer to obtain the land upon which the building would be constructed, and that to be part of the lease purchase agreement.
Okay.
That is an option.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we will now move to the next part of this presentation. Dr. Desimore?
Yes. Yes, now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Morrow, who's going to talk to us about capacity.
Good afternoon, board members. Dr. Graham, Mr. Martin, thank you for this opportunity to provide you an overview of our current high school capacity and some of the growth projections in the high schools in particular. First slide here demonstrates what we have for fish capacity currently, broken up by school and by zone. Just a quick synopsis is we have 23,719 high school seats district-wide. That is fish capacity. 7,701 in the east zone, 7,070 in the south zone, and 8,948 in the west zone. And I call your attention to this information just to show you the imbalance in seats we have between some of the zones, especially in the west zone. We anticipated a lot of growth in the west zone the past 10 years, and subsequently quite a few seats were put there, and we have a preponderance of our open seats now in the west zone. Looking out in a 10-year forecast as far as high school is concerned, you will see that by 17-18, our projections, our enrollment projections do show that we will reach our capacity in 23,719 seats in 17-18. That growth is also forecasted to continue out through 2024 through 25. Thought it important to break those projections down into both of all of our assignment zones. So we'll first take a look at the west zone. The west zone through the next 5 years, you can see it ultimately lands at a utilization rate of about 93 to 94% for all 5 of the schools in the west zone. So again, the number of seats out there in the west zone in comparison to what our projections are showing for enrollment shows that we'll have some seats in the west zone come 5 years. Picture's a little different in the east zone. Before we jump into these numbers, I do want to mention that we do have 400 seats currently in the east zone sitting in portable classrooms, and ultimately portables aren't the long-term solution. We want our students to be inside of a school, so our plan would be to slowly draw down the enrollment in those portables and plan to put them in a classroom. You will see that in the east zone in 2018-19, most of our schools are at 100% or nearing 100%. And I saved the south zone for last because that's where the the need is most critical. In the 5 years we're looking out, all of our schools will be well over 100% utilization rate. So we have pretty much a continuous growth in the South Zone. That's what our projections are showing us. Even if we equitably distribute all of that growth between the 4 schools, we're looking at about 106% or better utilization rate in all of these schools. Operating between 95 and 100% fish utilization rate is probably the most optimal thing for our schools. Obviously, we have schools right now operating above 100%. We did come to you last time and explain some of the woes those schools are having. Obviously, the impact of crowding has an impact on the educational experience of our students. So looking at a 95 to 100% utilization rate, we're looking at the additional need of about 550 seats in the South Zone. That's to get us to 100% utilization. If we want to look at 95% utilization, we're looking at about 900 additional South Zone high school seats. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Snell. He's going to talk about some of the options that we have to meet that demand in 17-18.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Graham, Mr. Martin, board members, appreciate the opportunity to come this afternoon to talk to you about the alternatives if the district does not add new schools. And they are not pretty, but I'm going to describe them to you this afternoon. The first thing that we could take a look at is handling this growth through portables. And as you can see from the slide there, we're talking about 22 total portables in the South Zone. The schools that are there, that are listed there, show how many of each one of those portables. The next slide shows what the cost effects are on those. And we have an estimate of $175,000 per portable, and you might say, well, that seems to be way high. But let me explain to you where that number comes from. This number comes from the purchase of buying the portables, because the existing portables that we have, they have to be placed 21 feet apart from each other. We do not have the real estate at these schools to put existing portables. Plus, most of the age of our portable fleet right now is in excess of 20 years. What we're talking about is a permanent solution for these schools as far as student capacity assignment. So what this includes is the purchase of what we call a 1-hour portable. These are portables that you can literally put side by side, and that helps us with the real estate problem and also helps the schools with security and issues like that. The portables would also include turnkey installation, which is all the ramps, steps, all of the electronic equipment that needs to go with it, fire alarm, technology that goes inside the portables, because these are going to be remote classrooms at these campuses. So just in the South Zone alone, using the estimate of 22 portables, we are at $3.85 million. Now, the one thing to remember about this is if we do this option, one, we still need to find the money to do this in the existing capital dollars, which we don't have at this time. Two, it's more of a permanent type fix. So these classrooms become essentially an additional building to the schools that are on the list. And then the third thing is that when you get to 2018 and 2019, you're still in trouble, because these portables are only taking us up to the 17-18 graph that you saw. So beyond that, we have to revisit and determine what we're going to do. So that's the portable solution there.
Okay, if you could pause just a minute. Mr. Armstrong, I believe, has a comment or a question.
Dr. Graham, sorry, question for you. Basically, by doing these portables, in my humble opinion, we're putting a Band-Aid over a problem. That's not actually fixing, it's just a Band-Aid. But then we're right back to what I think you've discouraged us to do in the past, was that's creating a mega high school. Is that correct? Once we start adding these portables to, and then our infrastructure in these schools really can't handle that anyways.
Well, with 5 portables at a school, I don't know that we'd turn into a mega school, but we would be bigger than we are. And anytime you add like that, you are impacting the overall infrastructure of the school. So because we're adding seats, but we're not adding a bigger media center, we're not adding a bigger cafeteria. So there is definitely an impact.
Which, and I discourage against that part because I think that, again, Reggie, as we've had, Mr. Snell, sorry.
That's fine.
We've had several conversations. I'm not even completely against building both, because from my understanding, if we did both high schools at the same time, we'd still only be down to 80% capacity in these schools then? Is that correct? 95, something like that?
Yeah, you'd be less. If you're building 2 high schools, you're adding 4,000 seats out in the district. You'd probably reduce the overall district utilization rate in high school into the low 90s. So you're building some capacity into the future there doing that.
And to me, that seems like either way, we're going to have to build the high schools. Whether we do it in 17, 18, or we just do them both in 17, we still have to do it. And to me, that seems like the most logical thing to do them both, because we're going to continue to grow. That's just how this county's always been. So that's just my opinion on it. Thank you.
The next slide talks about another way to look at this is adding additions. And for those of y'all that remember, back in 2006, this is the method of growth planning that we did back in 2006. We added 17 additions at 16 elementary schools throughout the district. In lieu of building new schools, we added existing capacities to the elementary schools. And this is basically that same format except at a high school level. What you're looking at in front of you is you have a 12 classroom building, an 18 classroom building, a 24, and a 36, depending on how much real estate we have at some of the schools. Estero and South Fort Myers currently have space to do an addition type model. It would be extremely difficult to do that model at Fort Myers and Cypress Lake. So you see the cost effects of doing those, and if we did, let's say, 2 of the 24s, you're looking at about $13 million in additions. One thing to note on this would be general ed classrooms only. No specialty technology labs or engineering labs or anything to do with science. They'd just be cut and dry high school classrooms. Now, one of the consequences of doing this on the next slide is, and Mr. Armstrong, you just hit on this, was the infrastructure. If we do anything with portables or additions at the South Zone schools, and this would also happen at the East Zone schools too, because we're looking at a high school in the East Zone the year after, your infrastructure upgrades would be between $750,000 to $1.5 million per school, depending on the issue. Now, when I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm talking about your cafeteria, your media center, administration space, also your technology rooms that are inside the schools in relationship to the MDF room and the IDF room, because you will be expanding technology, so they'll need additional square footage to manage the technology systems going in. So you can see that there is a consequence of infrastructure whether you move into if you do the portable option or if you do the addition option. And the same thing on the addition option. That really only takes us to the school year 18-19, and then we're sitting here again having another conversation about what do you do then. Well, then do you continue to add on to the existing schools, and as Mr. Armstrong indicated, develop a mega high school, kind of like what you see in Dade County. I don't know if we want to go that route. And plus, a lot of our current high schools, both in the South and East, they simply don't have the real estate to do this. So the last slide, and I have I tend to get stuck with a lot of weird stuff. This is the slide that I call the tomato throwing slide, which is when the audience would come and start throwing tomatoes, is double sessions. If we don't want to do anything because we do not currently have the capital funding available for the portable option or for the addition option. So if we have to fall back on double sessions, you have to pick, okay, what high school do you go to? Do you do more than one high school? And then there are all kinds of consequences of that. Do you keep the same school name? What do you do about sports? What happens with clubs and other activities? How do you administer the building? Who is the administrator ultimately in charge of the facility at the end of the day? How does it affect transportation when we do that? And then also, too, how would it affect the choice system as to lining up the students to select a high school? And then if they don't get the morning high school and they get the afternoon high school, then you may have people down here in who knows what colored shirt just really agitated. So that's the Armageddon choice, so to speak, is double sessions. And now I'm going to turn it over to the people that know all about the money, and they're going to tell us exactly how we can make a P3 work.
Did you want to mention the rezoning option you have on the slide?
Well, the rezoning option would be we take, especially at the high school level, we can take and readjust the zones. That has a lot of political outfall from that, because in order to feed the West, where there are seats in the West, you're going to need to move some people from either the East or the South. And I would tell you that I'm probably glad I'm not an elected official that's going to have to deal with moving the McGregor corridor over into the West Zone. That will be a very interesting conversation to be had, because anything you do as far as zone changes is going to be, there's going to be heartburn for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, if that's the only place we can go, then we have to make that choice.
Board members, before we move on, does anyone have any questions? Mr. Martin?
I do have an answer to your earlier question. Had not looked at the issue before, but there is a statute addressing construction of facilities on leased property. It says the board may construct or place educational facilities and ancillary facilities on land that is owned by any person after the board has acquired from the owner of the land a long-term lease for the use of this land for a period of not less than 40 years, or the life expectancy of the permanent facilities constructed thereon, whichever is longer. So to clarify my advice, if the board did have a lease in place that meets the requirements of the statute, yes, I do believe that you could use a public-private partnership for the purpose of building a facility there.
Thank you.
Not less than 40 years?
Not less than 40 years, or the life expectancy of the structure built on that site.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong?
And I guess this would be for both Mr. Morton and Reggie in two parts here. If we did two high schools at the same time, could we actually group them together and put them out for the RFP?
Yes.
And by doing that, would we not? Because I know, I believe from our previous conversations, it's $56 million.
The estimated cost right now is $54 million per high school. The original projection was to have both high schools open in 2017. When we went back and did the +3 analysis in the East Zone, we were able to buy basically a year for the East Zone, so that you could open the South in 2017 and the East in 2018, and you could still do that under one, for lack of a better description, one P3 contract.
And that's what I'm asking. If we grouped it together, when I say group it together, to give it to one contractor, would we get a better deal doing it that way? Could we get a better deal?
I think we could get a better deal, yes, based on our negotiation habits in the past, and knowing that we have the plans, we have the land, and we have a lot of stuff that's already done that they don't have to do. So we could get a better deal, yes.
And potentially maybe save millions on that by grouping it together that way.
I would say that. That's what Dr. Graham pays me to do, is save money.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Any other comments, board members, before we move on?
I'm just surprised we pay him.
We pay you?
Well, I tried to work out a percentage on savings, but that didn't fly.
You're worth every penny. All right, we'll move on to the next segment. Dr. Desmore, where are we going?
Yes, so I believe the need has been established and some of the options have been presented, and now we need to talk about potential options for financing some of those. So our financial advisor, Jerry Ford, is here to talk to us about those options. So I'd like to turn it over to him. Dr. Graham, did you want to say something?
I just want to make one comment, and I think I've told you all this, but I just want everybody to understand why Mr. Ford's here. You asked us to you wanted staff to get information on the benefits, the risk, and the long-term impact of a private-public partnership. And so we had a group of staff meet to discuss that and what we would need to present. And Mr. Ford was on the phone at Dr. Desamore's suggestion to be part of that conversation. And he shared with us, based on his experience and financial knowledge, those very things, the risks, the benefits, and the long-term impact. And after listening to him, staff agreed, why would we try and paraphrase this? We would just have him come and present it too. So that's why Mr. Ford is here as part of this presentation, to share the things that you asked us to find out for you. So Mr. Ford, thank you for being here.
You're welcome, and I am here solely in the capacity as your financial advisor. That's in a fiduciary capacity, and have no dog in the hunt for any of these avenues that you might choose to go down. Let me back up just for 1 second. Mr. Martin went through the legislation with you. There was also, as part of that legislation, the legislature required a task force to be performed to look at what they had passed and to make recommendations. Those recommendations were due earlier this year. That task force was a 7-member task force. They, in fact, looked at the legislation microscopically and came back with their recommendations on June 30th, I believe it was. I've talked with some of those folks. 2 are clients of mine. One is a person that I've worked on projects with, so I'm familiar with their work. And no major changes, but they do recommend some tweaks to some of the timeframes involved. They recommend that the legislature, that the state established a flat fee from all proposers submitting proposals to offset the cost of doing so, and they list a dollar amount in their report that they want the state to specify in there. And so there are a few dozen recommendations that they have with regard to this, and it's available online, or I have a copy of it and I can send it to you, and you might be interested in that. Just backing up a little bit, the term public-private partnership is relatively new, and I say that relatively, in the U.S., but it is not new overall. It's something that has been used for many years in Europe and in Canada, more aggressively than it is here. They don't have a system of local government tax-exempt financing that we have here in this country, and so their banks and their corporate contractors have been far more involved in building infrastructure and coming up with ideas and creative ideas for meeting those needs than has been the case pretty much here in the United States. So they're ahead of us in that area. To date, most of those projects has not involved K-12 education, but some of them have. There are some in Canada and there are a few in England that do involve K-12, and they involve the public-private partners is part of their piece of the pie for doing what they do, having certain concession rights in those schools. We haven't seen that in this country yet per se, but what we have seen for the most part in this country to date, we have seen a number of public-private partnerships that really have to do, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, with projects that have a revenue stream associated with them. So they're a toll road, they're a parking garage, they're something, a water and sewer system that generates rates, fees, and charges, which allows the partner to inject equity and have some of its own skin in the game, and to get the rate of return that they need for that, they're able to control those rates and charges over time and get their return through the payback there. It's a little harder with schools because we don't have that stream that we can give them, but not impossible. So one of the things that's important to do is sort of have a working definition of what the legislature means by public-private partnership, and then beyond that, what you mean by that. The legislature's is very broad. It just defines the type of project that has to be used, and it doesn't really get highly granular with it, as it should not. It's policy, and it's up to you to determine how you need to adapt it to you. But in most cases, what we see is a public-private partnership usually involves everybody having some skin in the game. Everybody's at risk somewhere, has contributed something. It can be as simple as, I have taken risks that the project is going to be completed in a certain period of time. I'm going to accelerate that time frame for you, and if it is late, I'm going to accept the consequences of that, and I'm going to hold you harmless for that, and I'm going to take the financial risk of it being late. Or it can be as extensive as the toll road in Broward County on 595, the new high-speed access lanes, in which European partners come in and inject significant equity for the right to have those toll facilities and receive those revenues from them and set those tolls over a period of years. What we've seen, for the most part, in this country with K-12 education has been a little bit different. They've involved a number of things. For example, there is a school in Tallahassee called Florida High. It's been part of Florida State University for more than 100 years. It is their lab school, and it has been the school where a lot of elected officials have sent their kids to school from K through 12. And when FSU wanted a new med school, they wanted to place it in the location of Florida High. And at the same time, they were developing an area called Southwood, where a lot of state office buildings are going. St. Joe Arvida was developing that, and they said, we don't have a school, and we need a school. We're willing to give you the land, and we're willing to put cash in the deal if you will move your lab school here, and if you will guarantee us a certain number of seats, we will obligate to filling those seats, and oh, by the way, if our numbers don't turn out to be what they were supposed to be, we'll pay you the full FTE amount per student that we missed that number by. So St. Joe Arvida clearly had skin in the game, and that allowed, along with about a dozen legislative changes several years ago, that allowed that school to be constructed. Florida Atlantic University has a lab school, and they wanted to put a facility at Treasure Coast. And they were trying to figure out how to do that in an efficient process and run their lab program, and how they could best staff it, house it. And what they did was formed a partnership with the developer, which involved the land, and it involved some impact fee agreements, and with the school district of St. Lucie County. So it's in the county, it's owned by FAU, it is staffed and run by the St. Lucie County School District. And what it did was bring that school in and provide needed capacity for both the school district and for FAU's program at a cost below what it would have been otherwise, and the developer was able to get a school in its neighborhood. You have something somewhat similar in the city of Pembroke Pines, and I know charter schools, but hang on just a second. They have a large charter school system, as you know, and you can start there as a pre-K student, and you can get a 4-year college degree on the Pembroke Pines campuses. Part of the reason why is they have a partnership with 2 different universities, Broward Community College with Nova Southeastern. I believe they were in there with FIU at one point in time. And one of the new facilities that we built had a section specifically constructed to accommodate the needs of one of the universities that would be holding classes there at night. And we receive a lease payment stream. I say we because I'm the financial advisor there. We receive a lease payment stream from that university for the use of those facilities. And oh, by the way, there's a county library that's there at the academic village that serves as the media center for the schools. So it's a true partnership in that the design builder made some concessions on what they did. The city provided the financing. The universities come in and lease space. And the county came in and allowed their library to be placed there and operate that library, and so it functions efficiently. When Osceola was going through the bulk of its boom a few years back, it looked at this and it said, how in the world can we possibly keep up? We can't do it solely through our COP program, but they were concerned about charter schools running wild at the time, and they said, well, wait a second, what if we partner with some charter schools strategically? We control the design and the quality of the schools that they will use, and we locate them where it suits us best. And so in one situation, you have a charter school that is co-located with another district school. They share bus loops. They share chiller plants. The charters were given certain concessions to do that, but it lowered the cost overall for the district to provide those services. Now, they all bear a couple of things in common. They were all done, for the most part, as design-build projects. They were done in a fairly quick fashion, but they all, at the end of the day, use the school district's financial capability. There are projects out there in which a private party will come to the door with financing, and if there is one that can come to the door and provide that financing and do so at a rate that does not increase your other cost overall and allows your monthly payments to them to be less than what they would have had you done it yourself, you definitely ought to take a look at that. I think one of the keys in going forward for you is when you bring in proposals is to require that those proposals have a clear segregation between their financing components and their construction components, so you can distinguish the true cost of each component and then compare it against what you would do and be very specific as to what they have to provide, what information they have to provide in terms of terms and conditions and cost and liabilities that would be in these financing agreements, so that you really have an idea of what you're dealing with here, so that you have something to compare. Most of the time when I've looked at them on the way in the door, and in many places, the initial proposal has frequently sounded better than what it looked to be when the details were there. But there have been times, for certain reasons, when somebody is willing to buy down the cost of a loan.
So basically what you're describing there is like a bridge loan. When you say private entities come to the table offering up money for a period of time, if the fees and everything are negotiated, that could be what one might call a bridge loan, right?
Well, bridge loans are short-term. They're there to provide financing during a construction and startup period until your revenues start rolling on, and their intent is to be taken out long-term, as you well know.
Right.
It can be a bridge loan. We've seen others where contractors have come in with their banks and said, no, we'll bankroll all of it for you, but at the end of the day, you're still back in a long-term, because you have to take ownership at the end of the day. That by definition is a financing lease. So it's a COP by another name. You don't issue it yourself, but it still comes out of your capital dollars. The bridge loan can come out of those capital dollars as well, but yes, you can do that. Bridge loans have certain things that you need to be aware of, whether they do it or you do it. One is, if they are fixed rate, if you can prepay it, there's usually a cost to that prepayment. It may not be stated as such, but it's at least built into the rate because they have a risk of having it taken away. If it's variable rate, it would not have a prepayment penalty associated with it, but you would have the risk of that variable rate. The other risk that you bear, whether you do it or somebody else does it, is that you are in the middle of an extraordinarily low interest rate environment, and for years now people are saying rates have got to go up. They haven't yet. I don't know when they're going to go up. But if you say, okay, I'm going to do a bridge loan today for 5 years, and I'm going to go into the market for permanent financing 5 years from now, you are in essence making a bet that interest rates are going to hold stable. Now, I will tell you that your recent refinancing had an average life of 11.4 years, 11.38 years. So that's 1 year longer than the 10-year Treasury. And your all-in cost of interest was 0.9% higher than the 10-year Treasury. That is an extremely low rate. Congratulations, by the way, on being a great credit. It's hard for somebody on the outside to match that. Charlotte Schools sold tax anticipation notes this morning, a 6-month cash flow loan. The winning rate was 0.1%. Oh. And 2 bidders were tied in the 6th decimal place. You know, it's an awfully low environment for high-quality governmental borrowers at this time. So you just have to check and make sure that if somebody can come to the table with something that's a better deal, that's what we want to take, but we want to make sure it's a better deal.
All right. Does that complete your presentation?
Unless you have questions for me.
Okay, board members. At this time, I think, Dr. Desimore, do you have anything to add to this? You want to put out here at this time?
No, just that we just needed some direction at this point from the superintendent and the board in terms of how we will proceed. When we look at the timeline of what we need to do, we know that based on the information that Mr. Moore and Mr. Snell just shared with us, we are looking at the need for a high school by August of 2017.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I was just saying, based on that information, if we back that up, and Mr. Snell can speak to the timeline, but basically we need to start that construction, I believe, in July of 2015. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know if y'all have seen this piece of paper here. It's an outline on the South Zone High School timeline. We need to be in the dirt digging for the South Zone High School no later than December of 2015. That's actual construction. Now, normally in front of a construction project, we have at least 6 to 9 months to do permitting, designs, site selection, things like that. So on this particular sheet, I've outlined that we have approximately 6 months to do the milestone that we are currently in, which is a development of some sort of financial package, whether it's a P3 format or a COPS format or whatever, a hybrid of those two. We have until basically the February 1st of next year to get that resolved.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've got to determine what financing vehicle we will use by that time. Of course, whatever we do, there's preparation work that needs to be done in order to get that financing in place. So we've got all the background to do before Reg and his crew go into the next, design and plan phase. So we're here asking for some direction in terms of how you all want us to proceed. We've talked about or had some conversation now about the public-private partnership, or the P3, as you'll hear it called, what some of the pros and cons are, what we need to look for and plan for if we are to go into one of those agreements. Also, we know that there's some more traditional financing options that we have in front of us, such as COPS that we've done over the past several years, and in the past when we've needed some additional financing. We also have some option that have been presented to us for items like bridge loans, as Ms. Dozier had mentioned earlier. We do know that there are, some companies and some individuals out there who are ready and eager to work with us if we decide to move forward with one of those types of funding options. And so we need to determine at this point how we will move forward. We do want everyone to keep in mind that we're looking at, as Reggie said, February of 2015, which is just several months from now. P3 is a very different option for us. It's something that we've not broached before, so we will definitely need some additional time to really get our ducks in a row for that, if that is the direction that we choose to go. So at this point, we're just looking for some direction as to what the consensus is as to what you all feel we should be looking at in terms of financing before we move forward.
All right, board members, I think they're looking for some type of direction for us to give to Dr. Graham. We have had an extensive discussion from staff about the seats that are out there, how they're used, where they are, and we had that a few weeks ago, and now we've had a look at the financial issues. So I think what they're looking for from us is some direction, if that's correct, Dr. Graham, as to how, as a board, what we can do, what we can support, because we know there's no money there. And so we've got to figure out how to fix it. We've got seats that we've got to have. We've got seats that we have to have available by August of 2018. And we've got several options. Do we want to build schools? Do we want to say we're going on double sessions? Do we want to say, what was the third one? There was one other. Do we want to rezone completely?
Add portables.
So there's
Portables and additions.
So there's 4 different options. Anybody would like to start this conversation? Ms. Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And it sounds like the P3 could be a way for us to be able to afford building schools now. The presentation brings to me some more questions, if I may. Number one, are there tax advantages to this?
For us or for
For
them?
us, yes. No, for us. No, okay. I asked a question of Mr. Snell about, well, what would happen, what is the time frame for doing our financing through P3? Because it would seem to me like we would have to be very careful to make sure that we had every detail in the contract covered. If the company were to go out of business, what would happen? Do we have that built into the contract so that we would still end up owning the school and the property? And, how do we make sure that we have those terms in? And what is the time frame to do that? Does that fit into the time frame that we are currently looking at?
And I think
to get that, because that's a different way of financing.
Part of that question I think I can answer. Part of the P3 legislation, I think all of you received copies of that, is that part of that is we can actually hire somebody to do, that has done that in the past, that has the expertise to look at that, which would basically give us some confidence with the fact that they know what they're doing, they know what they're presenting to us, and that we are not going to be put in a bad light. So I think that, and I know that there have been some groups that have actually come to the district that have proposed being, the advisor for us going out with this P3. So, that to me is an easy piece, because there are groups that have done this that can be hired as like the project advisor. That's the easy piece. I think that for us, there's so many groups out there that have done this, maybe not with a high school, but they've done colleges, they've done bridges, they've done toll roads and stuff like that, that this is not, it's not a new, let's put it this way, it's not a new concept for a lot of people, even though it's uncharted waters that we as school districts are in. Right. So go ahead.
So
I
then
didn't
what
mean
you're
to
saying,
interrupt
no,
you, but I
that's
just
okay.
wanted to add that.
So then what you're saying is that there are companies out there who would take over the contract process, that they
Correct.
would
And-
make sure
yeah.
that all of those details are addressed.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that the only other question you had? Because it looks like you've got a lot of questions, and I'm going to let you go ahead if you want to.
Well, no, I think that's it for now. Yeah.
Okay. Board members, anybody else have any questions? Or Ms. Morgan?
Maybe I missed something, but how are we going to pay for it? We seem to be deciding that we're going to build schools, but the bottom line is whether we take it out of where are we getting the money?
Don't we still have COPS capacity of, I think, $300 million?
Ms. Dozier, I don't know what today's capacity is. I didn't run it before I came down here, but yes, you have capacity in excess of what you would need to fund the high schools, whether it were through somebody else or you did it directly.
Okay, all right. And I think the purpose of some of this, as I've said in the past, I think the legislature realized that funding is short of what the growth of the state is. So this was a way of putting legislation in place that would kind of cut through some of the red tape for school districts, because they've been hearing from districts, we don't have enough space and we've got to build and we don't have any money. As Mr. Tubb did say, he's optimistic about the revenue streams, that things are starting to look better. We know that, we're looking at possible impact fees, additional state funding. And then there are also a couple of, there's a couple of other little issues that are out there that right now that are going to come on the horizon in the near future that could possibly bring in revenue for school districts that I'm not really at liberty to talk about at this time. But it's something that people are working on, and I have been working with those individuals at the state level, and hopefully we're going to see a very positive return with the end of this. I'm very optimistic about that we're going to be able to work with our legislators and get something put in place that's going to create a long-term funding stream for all school districts.
Okay, so let me just back up a bit. We have February of 15, we have to know how we're going to finance the project, right? Is that right? By February 15, we need to know how we're going to finance
an approximate date, yes.
So
I'm sorry, if I may back up and speak to the question that you just asked as well about the money, because it's a valid question. Yes, we are talking about how we're going to finance this school, or these schools that we know we have need for coming up. And what has to happen at this point is we know we need the capacity. If we're going to commit to this, then either, if we're talking about whatever financing vehicle we're looking at, it's going to be a payment, whether it's a private-public partnership, whether it's a traditional COPS, whether it's a bridge loan, whatever it may be, it's going to be several $1 million a year lease payment. And what we're looking at that point is to either commit some additional of our current revenue stream that's coming in right now in capital, which would be at this point either $2 million or impact fees would be our largest funding streams, $2 million of course being the only substantial funding source we have coming in at this point. So we would have to commit some more of that, and right now we're at about 50% of capacity at this point. So we would have to commit some more of that, which means if we have no other revenue sources coming in at that point, then that would mean that we would have to either sacrifice on running our reserves down more than what we have. And at the end of this 5-year plan currently, in terms of what you see in the budget that you all will get ready to approve tonight, that reserve is at about 7% at the end of 5 years, which was at the low end of what we try to run. So we're either going to run that down additionally, or we are going to sacrifice in other areas, and it would really be maintenance of our existing schools, because we know at this point our technology costs are going to increase. They're not going to decrease. Or we seriously look at getting additional revenue sources into the district. Those are the options that we're looking at in terms of payment of any additional leases that we have coming in.
And I just want to insert at this point, and I heard what you just said, Ms. Dozier. If that doesn't play out, we, and Mr. Ford has said this to us, and I think he has said it to the board before, we are going to have to look at some other stream of revenue, which means we're going to have to go back and look at either a referendum for bonds or look back at the sales tax. We are going to have to find another source at some point. Regardless of what decision you make on this, we're going to have to find another source.
Right. Well, we don't have to find another source if we don't build schools.
That's true.
Okay.
But the children are coming.
I know.
I hear you.
Okay.
But at the same time, Ms. Morgan, on that, if you do the portable route or the addition route, we still don't have the money to do that.
So basically what you're saying is we need more seats, but we don't have the money. We have different options where we can get money. We have different options where we can solve these problems. And this is a proposal that I have. I would like to, staff has presented us all the information. I would like to see, this is me personally, I would like to see staff get into this and come back with some proposals to us, some definite proposals, and say, all right, this is this proposal, this is what the effect would be. This is this proposal, this is what the effect would be. Mr. Armstrong, can you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. Looking from the construction side of this, portables, Band-Aid. That's not an option. Double session, I'm going to tell them where your office is, not mine. Sorry.
Honey, they'll come to yours.
It's 3308 Canal Street.
Thank you for putting that out there. Double sessions, it's not an option. It really isn't. The P3 seems to be our best bet. Ms. Morgan does bring up interesting points, but I also have a lot of confidence in our finance department that they'll look at different ways and bring it to us, and that seems to be what Dr. Desmore does really well. What I'd like to see on my personal is to actually look at the P3, bring us all the pros and cons, bring it back to a board workshop session, and let's look at it, dissect it, and make sure this is the right way to go. That's my personal opinion on it. I think it's something that's worth looking into, and there's still some questions out there, and there's still some cons to it that I still want to reach out and discuss with a few other people too. But I think that right now seems the most feasible way to do this.
Ms. Morgan?
Okay, going back to what I was going to say earlier. So starting with the February 15 date, and then looking at November elections, and assuming that we want to have at minimum a workshop, a briefing, and then a workshop on what the various options are, can we talk about setting 2 dates in November, December, to do the kind of, to make the kind of decisions, have the conversations we need to have, make the decisions we need to make, and still be ready to meet the February deadline? Or do we need to start looking at giving you guys something earlier than that?
Take a big, deep breath. I saw that, Ms. Desmore. Go ahead.
I understand what you're saying, and I think we could do that with the caveat, because we're talking about we're talking about different buildings here, where we have several different options on the table in terms of 2 high schools, when they come into play, all these things. If we were going to go through a traditional, and I have to consult my financial advisor, so I want him to speak up if at any point he disagrees with me. But if we're talking about waiting to November, and then we're talking about then, a little bit of time, a couple months to kind of get everything into play, I really wouldn't have any heartburn about that if we were talking about a traditional financing structure that we are very familiar with, that we're used to, that we've done before. Okay? So any, traditional COPS type funding, I'm comfortable with that, talking about waiting till November and going through there with that. And I think Mr. Ford probably would say the same thing, but you tell me what you think about that.
It's your time frame to do a traditional COP would be on the long end 90 days, on the short end 45 days, because there are no terms and conditions to negotiate.
Right.
But you need to back up a little bit, because nobody can finance anything unless they know how much they need to borrow. So that's really the critical path, is what date do you find out how much you need? And then that's the point at which you can access the markets. And so depending upon the creativity of the private financing proposals and what type of strings and bells and whistles they come with, and looking at those terms and conditions, that may take some time, but nobody knows how much because we haven't seen them.
And that's the part that very nervous about, in terms of waiting till November and then trying to put what could potentially be a very new funding structure in place. I think we're going to need some additional time to do that. So one option that we may look at is, since we're talking about different facilities, different schools, the first school that we need that presents the most immediate need, let's go our traditional route on that, because we're trying to wait till November to kind of, talk about some additional issues when we're going to have a new member of the board on hand, and let's talk about it at that point. And then maybe any different funding structure that we may look at that we haven't done before, such as a public-private partnership or whatever that is, we can look at that for another building that would be coming down the pike either the year after that or the next year after that, so that we have some time to make sure that we're rolling it out and that we're rolling it out right and that we've gotten the best deal that we can get for the district. So based on your time frame, that would be what I would be most comfortable with if we were going to roll like that.
Okay, then my question would be, are we going to get the kind of P3 bids we want if we're looking at one high school instead of two? Because you're talking about a significant difference in scope of project, and you may be talking about a very different population of people who may be willing to come in, particularly given that if we're talking about P3s and being the first people out of the gate with respect to doing this in Florida. Then my other question would be, my other observation or question would be, if you did an RFQ, would that tell you anything before November? Would that tell you anything that you would like to know come November?
Yes, it would, Ms. Morgan. I think one thing to take a look at this and what we're talking about today, and Ms. Dozier hit on this, is what we're saying is, let's put a RFP, RFQ, whatever you want to call it, out for the P3 program. And what that does is it gets all of the players, as Mr. Ford says, with skin in the game, that gets them in writing with proposals. And what that does is it allows the district to analyze those proposals and see where we are. Remember, we do not have to do anything. Right. But if we don't get the information about the programs and what the numbers may or may not be, we can't sit here till November, December, January trying to figure that out. I think what we're trying to say is, if we can move forward and start to get some of these proposals in with an RFQ based on our standards and specifications, then we can begin to analyze that so that we can show you something with numbers attached to it, so that the smart people like Jerry Ford can say this is a good deal, this is a bad deal. But we can't get to that point until we have something on paper. So I think, and we're not obligated.
And until you have some direction, correct?
Correct. We can get it's like getting a bid on a regular project. You kind of have an idea what you can afford. You get the bid in, and then you say, well, I can't do that at this time. And the district does have history in this. We have started projects that we have stopped. New Michigan Elementary comes to mind for me. And then we've also had projects where we've gone through the RFQ process, had a construction manager in negotiations, stopped two high schools back in 2007 and 2008 because of the growth of the financial disaster. So we're not committed to anything. But I guess what we're saying is, let's see something that we can show the board what direction.
So let me go on record as saying I would like a high school in Bonita Springs. Let there be no doubt. That is my first choice. Okay. And what I hear you saying is you are essentially...
You have property down there, too, if you...
That is correct.
Are you aware of that? There's already property there.
Oh, yeah. I've already talked to... Yeah.
Okay. Well, I didn't know you were aware of that.
So what I essentially hear you doing is making a recommendation to us.
Correct.
The recommendation is that we do an RFQ immediately, and that we sit down probably in October and look at what we've got, and then have a presentation for the board early in November or shortly after the board is elected with a recommendation from staff. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think I'll make the recommendation We'll work with staff. I think Reggie's giving you the timeline that we have to work with and what would happen with the RFQ. But what I've heard three of you, I think, now say, and I think Ms. Fisher's going to weigh in with her other questions, is that you would like us to come back with a recommendation to either do an RFQ or not, to fit in the timeline that's been shared today. I've heard three of you say, why don't you come back and tell us what we think you ought to do, what you ought to pursue. Is that what I'm hearing? Am I hearing the right thing?
I think that's what you're hearing. And I know that Mrs. Fisher has been very patiently waiting during a lot of discussion. So, Ms. Fisher, would you like to?
Well, additional discussion is always very helpful. So what I'm hearing you say, and I support that, is to go and get more information regarding the P3 form of financing. My question would be, looking at our current debt, which is approximately, what?
$400 million. Current outstanding principal, I believe, is around $500 million.
It's 4. I can give you that number exactly.
Okay.
He's going to give us the number exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know. I've heard him say it before, so I just didn't want to say a number that was not wrong, but over $400 million or close to $500 million. So then in getting financing, how does that current debt weigh into that, even if we're doing traditional financing?
$427 million in outstanding principal. And then, I'm sorry, ask the second part of your question again.
Yeah, so then when we're looking for financing, even if it were traditional financing, how does that current debt impact our ability to get more financing?
Well, when we run your capacity numbers, we assume that you will never exceed 1 mil of your capital outlay levy. Now, you may have an internal buffer below that, and one of the things this board has always done so well when other folks sort of edged up above 1 mil is y'all never did.
Right.
So we've never been at that level. And at one time, I think you're right, the debt had been up over $500 million. A lot of it's paid down now. We haven't borrowed in several years, and its final maturity is 2028. So there is capacity there to do that and still not hit that 1 mil buffer, whether you do it on your own or whether somebody comes in and wants to give us a really, sort of buy-in rate, which we would love to see. But it's there, and it would not impact your credit ratings. What does impact your credit ratings is the amount of liquidity that you have on hand. Your undesignated, unreserved fund balances. Cash is king.
Okay.
So that's my soapbox moment.
And that is very good. So then we're looking at whether we go with traditional or if we go with P3, we're going to have a payment to make. And we're still back to where we were several months ago when Dr. Desimore told us we had some options, which would include bonding, which would include using reserves, which would include possibly a sales tax. So basically, we have an option where some private people will come and put the money up front, if I'm understanding that correctly, with the P3. And then we will make a payment, which might be consistent over the term of the contract.
Until you see it in writing, assume there is no free lunch, that a loan is a loan is a loan. Whether they bring the money or you bring the money yourself, it's still a loan and you're still going to have the payment and it's still going to have the same impact.
Okay. So that being said, we should get more information, and I agree with that, and see exactly how that plays out and not waste time in doing that. And on the other hand, then we still need to be thinking on the other side here is, okay, how are we going to make the payments? And so then are we going to be, again, revisiting and looking at what are we going to do? And I remember from your presentation before, Dr. Desimore, the thing that rendered us the most money with the least problem really was the sales tax, as you presented it. So there we are with two issues to consider, in my humble opinion. Okay.
Yes, that there are two issues. How are we going to finance it, and then how are we going to make payment? That is very true.
Right. So when we get this additional information about the P3 financing, what we're doing is with an RFQ or an RFP, getting that information, but we're not making a commitment yet. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm going to kind of sum this up. It sounds like we have our marching orders for the superintendent. I want to remind the board that the P3 was put in place, that piece of legislation, for a reason. There was a conscious decision made to try to enable school districts that were in a growing mode to be able to get funding because they realized that the funding is not there. They are not able, or they don't have the adequate funding at this time for the last couple of years to adequately fund public education, which is their paramount duty. I think one of the things that Ms. Fisher has talked about is the stream of revenue that would produce the largest amount of revenue, and she has said would be the go out for a referendum for a tax increase. This county has been notorious for voting down referendums. And one reason is because you need to demonstrate to them that you have exhausted all avenues possible. So I know that there's a reason this P3 was out there, and we've got to demonstrate we have done everything possible. And I think we have to do it in a way that it is the most sensible and it is the best and in the best interest of education, student learning, and then, of course, the fiduciary responsibility that we have has to be the best possible as well. To me, portables, that is not a sound educational idea, because having been a teacher in a portable years ago, and I know portables have improved and all that, but it's still a totally different animal than having a regular classroom. Double sessions, I don't know about y'all, but that's something that I heard Mr. Armstrong say that's not an option. And because we have choice, that would be a tremendous, Mr. Mora, I can't imagine what your job would entail if we said, okay, we're going on double sessions now, the ball's in your court, go with it, tell us what you're going to do and how you're going to solve all these problems. And all of a sudden, you get just a few people that are going to opt for the evening, and you come back to us and you say, okay, now not only are we going to have a lottery, we're going to have a double lottery. First of all, you got to put your name in that you want a daytime slot, but if you don't get that daytime slot, you may have to go to the other lottery and get a nighttime slot. And then once, I just can't imagine I can't imagine what your job would entail if we did that. I just can't. Plus, to me, I just don't think that's in the best interest of student learning, having double sessions, And then we haven't even begun, are we going to have teachers that are teaching, 2 sessions a day? Is it fair for those students in the morning that have the brightest? Because there will be some teachers that will opt to teach during 2 sessions, but is that teacher going to be exhausted by the time the session, the evening session? So there. Off my soapbox for a while. Dr. Graham, I believe that you have got direction from the board for you to get with staff and put out some RFQs, RFPs, RFIs, and come back with us with some options and cost out what each option is, and with that, we will be ready to make a decision.
Okay, so you want me to bring some recommendations?
Mm-hmm. I think that's what, isn't that what everybody said? We want the staff to come back with recommendations? Is that correct? Mr. Armstrong, I see you shaking your head.
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Morgan, is that what I hear from you?
Yep.
And
Yes.
okay, we're all on record. That's what I'm saying as well. So look forward to those recommendations. Thank y'all very much for all of your presentation. Thank you for the very professional and way that you presented everything and all the information. We just wish that you could have told us all of a sudden you found some money somewhere, but since you didn't, we will we'll make sure that we are ready for your recommendations when you bring them to us. Okay, we will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public comment, and I'm going to ask, is there anyone on my left side that wishes to speak? Anyone on my right side that wishes to speak? We have one speaker. Do you understand the rules of public comment? Okay, very good. Then we're not going to go over what the rules are. If you would like to come to the microphone, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name, sir. Once you get to the microphone, sir.
Thank you. My name is George Fox. As you know, I've been following this pretty closely, and I've looked up a few things. From the Department of Revenue, Lee County has right at $1 billion of taxable sales each and every month. And if this board were to ask for and receive a 0.5% sales tax, it would generate $5 million a month for this board, which is $60 million a year. So rather than going through all this, you could, with that $60 million, you could pay for one school each and every year. So you could grow as the county grows and pay for it as you go along and deal with the existing debt in years when you don't have to build a school or when you can, you can work it around to get that debt paid off. I'm a general contractor. I worked for Wright Construction, Gulf Point, as a superintendent and project manager on schools. So I'm well aware of school construction and how it goes. And when it comes to negotiations between the school board and a private business, it's not a fair fight. They win every single time. That's why everybody lines up to bid schools. It's very profitable to be in the school business. There are companies out there that's all they do is bid schools. So great information and everything. Don't hold your breath that the RFQ is going to bring some new daybreak. It's not. They're very good at what they do, and they're not going to build a school unless they can make a lot of money. The only way this board will ever right the ship is to go for the sales tax. Plain and simple. The money that comes in goes, it's collected from the public, but it goes right back to Lee County. It stays local. So when you pay that teacher and she pays her rent or she pays her mortgage or she buys her groceries, that money goes to as the second largest employer in this county. To not fund yourself to get in the financial situation that it's in is totally irresponsible. Really, your job needs to be get this district out of financial trouble and build one school a year. Don't build two. Don't go to financing. Get the money. If you tell the people what the real situation is and that it's justified and put it out there for a vote, they will vote for it. I know people who are very conservative, hate taxes and all that, but they understand if we got to have it, we got to have it. Okay? I mean, it's really that simple. You have to steel your back here and make the call. Really, that's really what this boils down to. The weaving and bobbing, zigging and zagging, and kicking the can down the road is the same problem that everybody complains about the federal government, their deficits. Nobody steps up and does what needs to be done. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. And if and when we decide to go out for a referendum, we will be calling on you. Number one, as a school district, we cannot finance what it takes to do a campaign, and you have to do a campaign to go out for a referendum. So we'll put you in, your time is up. So we will put you in charge of that, and part of that is, if the board agrees, we'll put you in charge of that. Part of that is raising the funds that you need to finance that referendum. I mean, we've already been down this road, and we've had analysts and everybody else, and basically they've said you will not pass a referendum right now. And I love your optimism. I love the fact that you stand there and tell us that we can pass one, and I love the fact that you say some people out here. I know some people out here too. And a lot of the people that I've talked to, in fact, some of our very committees, and they're supposed to be, our friends. They're supposed to be our supporters. I believe you serve on the Curriculum Advisory Committee. Our advisory committees, there's a reason they're called advisory, because they advise us on things. And there's one committee that was loud and clear, and it was, don't go out for a referendum. You've got to show that you've exhausted all efforts. So anyway, thank you for your passion. We appreciate your speaking forward, and we will certainly consider all of your comments. With that, board members, we will now go to board member comments, and Mr. Armstrong, I'll begin with you.
I have none.
Ms. Morgan.
And I will also say to Mr. Fox, I think it's time to think about putting together a group and seeing if you can raise the money to do a campaign. I know that we get a very mixed message up here. We have two different groups in the community talking to us. And I see it as, frankly, I see it as a 50-50 proposition. I'm not as negative as Mrs. Dozier, and I'm not as positive as you are. But maybe it's time to test the waters. Maybe it's time to put your name out there and become the flashpoint for the people in the community who want to advocate for this. And I encourage you, and I'll help you any way I can as a citizen. Just want you to know that. Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Fisher?
And the only comment I will do is to tell Mr. Fox that I also, as a citizen, would support that. And I believe that a few months back we had some offering of help and financing from the National Education Association to educate the public that we have exhausted all options, and that it is time for people to take that. And looking at even a penny sales tax, it would be a minimal impact on families, and it would also be shared up to about 25% by tourism. So, and was that a 1 penny, sir, or a 1/2 that you said $60 million? Right.
If you could get that, you can finance to pay off the debt, and then all you have to do is
And I'm just going to make a commitment now to get back with Mr. Castellanos and the representative from the NEA and bring that information forward again. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. I'm going to hold my comments until this evening. I will now go to, again, I thank you for your comments, and I don't mean to be sounding negative. I'm simply just putting the information out there that I've been presented with in the past. I'm going to go to Board Attorney. Do you have anything this evening?
Yes, Ms. Dozier, board members. I think one of the things Mr. Fox might wanted to tell you is that he has met with me to discuss this issue. I provided him some advice concerning the statutory process for passage of the sales tax referendum, and also the constraints placed on the school board, the school district, to use public funds to support a campaign for the passage of such a referendum.
Thank you. Dr. Graham, your comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a few comments about a completely different issue. And thank you for the direction, I'll say that. It gives us a place to go, and we are grateful for that as staff. Staff is working on the issue that's been before us regarding the accountability system. And so I wanted to share with you where we are so that you would have this information as the conversation continues. We have developed basically what we think is the challenge, or the challenge. We created a challenge statement, I'll call it that, and that is that the pre-K to 12 accountability environment in Florida is perceived to be disrupting schools and interfering with student learning. And so it is our charge to figure out how to address that and to meet that challenge in a positive way. So I want to begin by saying we've come to the determination that there is more than one issue at hand, and we've come up with three, and I personally believe there are four, and I'll share the fourth one just as an aside. But the three issues that we believe, and we think it's important to separate them because they're getting clumped together, and we think that's confusing the issue. But one is standards is one issue. The assessment, the amount of it, the frequency of it, that's another issue. And then the third, which is probably the one that is creating the most angst among some, is the high stakes related to that assessment. The unspoken one, the fourth one that I believe exists, just based on all the comments that we've continued to hear, there is an element out there that is just tired of their child's self-esteem being hurt. And they're tired of hearing that their child is less than or is unable to succeed based on the accountability system. So right now, what we're doing is we are working to, well, let me say this before I say that. Within each of these issues, there are multiple sub-issues, for lack of a better term. There are, and they're all non-quality. They all lead to non-quality, to be perfectly honest. But there's time loss, there's expense, there's impact on students, there's impact on teachers, there's impact on parents, there's confusion, there's frustration. There are a lot of other issues that need to be addressed within these bigger ones. But there are three main ones, we believe. So we are going to be working on, and I'm calling it a process rather than a plan, because there are going to be multiple steps we have to take to be able to get to where we all want to land. And I really, and I've thought this all along, I've just never said it. Well, I've said it in the community, but I haven't said it in these meetings. We really believe we all have the same goal, and that is that the accountability system become more reasonable and less punitive and less voluminous, I guess would be another way to say it. And we have to acknowledge that it's going to take time to get us where we want to go. So we've started the conversation with staff, and we are going to continue to work, and I'm going to call it a process rather than a plan. And so the first step in our process, that things we can do immediately in our district, we're going to begin with third grade retention, and we are looking at the options that exist. This district's past practice has been to be less than aggressive at looking at those options, and so we're going to begin there. We also want to look at the assessments related to VAM, and that is a state issue, and we're going to have to work with DOE to see if we can do something about reducing or even getting a waiver, perhaps, to not have to deal with VAM even for a year. So those are things that particular issue I'll be taking to FADS in 2 weeks to talk with other superintendents, because that's going to require the commissioner to proceed with a waiver. She's the only one that can do that. DOE is the only place that can go. So I share all that just to say we are working, and I will be coming to you each meeting to tell you where we are in the process and what conclusions we've come to. And by your own policy, there is an expectation, if you choose to want to do it, that every board advisory can be given a topic every quarter by the superintendent, and that would be just a standing item on their agenda to discuss. And in particular, the curriculum advisory is their purpose. In their purpose, it says that they are to address issues around assessment. So I think if you want to go that direction and use your own policy, we can certainly. I haven't called that meeting yet because you're going to approve your appointments tonight, and I think according to the schedule that I've been shared, the first advisory to meet is actually this week with EDAC. So we can get information to all the advisories before their first meeting and say, okay, for this quarter, here are the issues. And we can chunk it as the year goes on so that there is involvement from your advisories as well. So I just want to share that for you all to know that we are working, and for the community to know that they have been heard, and it's a process that we've begun.
I would also ask you to clarify what was meant in the newspaper or the media about your cabinet appointments, or there was some miscommunication, I think. Would you please explain what your cabinet is and what exactly that group was dealing with?
There's a superintendent's cabinet, which is basically the assistant superintendents and the school development executive directors, and the director of staff development and the executive director for HR. They were in the room, but it was staff. There was a larger group immediately following the meeting we had last week to begin to address, okay, we've bought time, that's all we've done, and we need to begin to determine what we're going to do. And that's where what I just shared with you came from. So it's not a task force, it's not my cabinet, it's staff who are working on this issue in what we believe is going to be a logical, progressive fashion.
I think there was some
Yes,
misunderstanding.
yes, and I know Ms. Chandler's tried to help the media understand if they could stop reporting that we have a task force. That would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with nothing else to come before this board, this meeting is, we have a 5:05 hearing for our final budget, and 6 o'clock action meeting with no further business. This meeting is adjourned.